This morning we are going to talk about why we believe things. And we're going to talk about mythology. And we're also going to talk about history. Because when it comes to Christmas time, a lot of what we believe and a lot of our Christmas spirit is kind of the hype from Christmas mythology. And it really isn't based on history. I don't know if you know this or not, there actually was a St. Nicholas. There really was a historical person named St. Nicholas. He was a Christian who lived from AD 270 to 343, so the end of the 3rd century, beginning of the 4th century. He was a bishop in a church in what is now modern-day Turkey. And he did have a reputation for secretly giving gifts. How you develop a reputation for doing something secretly, I don't know. But he did. And there was a festival to celebrate him on December 6th. And the night before, children would leave out their shoes outside their door so that St. Nicholas could come by and give them a gift. He was a real person. That's a real story. That's true history. And it is from St. Nicholas that we get Santa Claus. And Santa derives his name from St. Nicholas. Kind of the legends surrounding him come from St. Nicholas. But, he's nothing like the real St. Nicholas. Like the way we know Santa Claus today, he lives up in the North Pole. He travels around the entire world on December 24th, delivering presents to all the good children. The elves make the toys all year long. The flying reindeer pull the sleigh. So all this mythology has just developed into the Santa Claus we know today. And our beliefs at Christmas time, our belief is based not on history, but on mythology. In other words, it's not based on the actual historical person of St. Nicholas, but it's based on the mythology about Santa Claus that we know today. However, there is some evidence for Santa, right? And we need to acknowledge this. It's not all myth. There actually is some evidence for Santa Claus. So what we have over here is a Christmas tree. And we're going to imagine that it's Christmas Eve. And we're going to see how we set this up here. Now, I have young children, okay? So what we're going to do on Christmas Eve is we'll leave a plate of Christmas cookies. Right? I don't know if you can see those. We decorated them yesterday. This is Sophie's candy cane. See? So we make Christmas cookies. We leave a plate of cookies and a glass of milk for Santa. There are no presents under the tree. All right? This look familiar? This is how it's set up on Christmas Eve. Now here's what we're going to do. And I didn't tell you guys back there about this. I'm sorry. But what we're going to do is we're going to go to sleep. Not really, okay? We're going to pretend. You're going to close your eyes for just a minute. If we can you turn the lights off? Can we make it as dark in here as we can? So it's Christmas Eve. You're asleep. So close your eyes for just a second. Keep them closed. You're sleeping. No peeking. All right, it's Christmas morning. You can wake up now. Seriously, wake up. You can wake up. All right. What's different? There's presents under the tree. What else is different? There's no cookies and milk, right? There you go. Santa's real. That's your proof, right? That's the evidence. And if you're a kid, that's very persuasive. There is evidence for Santa, but it's really only persuasive enough to convince a child who already believes in Santa, right? No thinking adult is going to be convinced by that. And the older you get, you kind of start to think about it and you're like, okay, my parents are still awake when I go to bed. And my parents can put presents under the tree. And my dad likes cookies. So, and you figure it out, right? The evidence is there, but it's not very persuasive. And there's also some mythology in what we've come to believe about Christmas and in how we imagine Jesus' birth. So, we're going to draw the nativity scene. Is there anyone who likes to draw? You guys, it's church. Nothing bad is going to happen to you up here. Anyone who likes to draw? I can wait all day. I can wait all day. Anybody who likes to draw or is willing to draw? Pete! Come on up, Pete. We'll find out. All right, so Pete is going to draw the nativity scene for us. Oh, thanks, Michelle. And what I want you guys to do is just shout out everything that Pete should draw up here. Shout out everything that should be in our nativity scene. There you go. Here's your marker. So shout it out. What should be in our nativity scene? All right, I'm hearing a lot of things. What could you make out, Pete? Manger, all right. And the star? A star? There's a star?
You say stars or eight stars?
Well,
There's a
well, a big one. I heard, let's see, that's a stable. You said manger. I heard baby Jesus. I don't know. Did I hear baby Jesus? Maybe I didn't. But he should be in it. Well, just hold on, Billy. Hold on, man. I put him in a manger. Pete, give us a manger. In a manger? All right. How about Joseph and Mary? Give us Joseph and Mary. All right. Now, which one is which?
What do you mean which one? There's the hair on this one. Wait a minute.
There it is. Now we know. Now we know. What else should be in our picture? I heard animals. I heard donkey. Can you draw a donkey? You can do a donkey. There we go. What else? We're missing some characters. Who else needs to be in our drawing? We have Joseph and Mary. The wise men. Yeah, the three kings. The shepherds. Go ahead, Pete. Right. First service did stick figures too. Don't feel bad. Give us a sheep. Give us a sheep. And a shepherd's staff. You got room. Yeah. Here we go. How about a shepherd's staff? Give him a staff in his hand. Like a candy cane. Here we go. Oh, nice. Who else? I heard the wise men, right? The three kings. We need the three kings. Camel? Okay. Let's keep going. It'll work again, hopefully.
Camel.
I think the marker was telling you something, Pete. How about the three kings? The wise men? I heard wise men. Can we get three kings in there?
1, 2, 3. Boy, sing almost.
Who else? We're missing someone. The angel. I heard the angel. Yes.
Stick figure again.
Stick figures are all right.
Oh, wait.
There he is. There he is. Are we missing anything? We're not putting the little drummer boy on there. That's a song. Anything else? Is that it? Their presents? The wise men had presents? I think that's good. I think we pretty much got it all. Yeah, they were giving presents to him.
Well, I don't think the wise men had boats.
That's all right, Pete. Does that look good? Are we satisfied? That look good? All right, thanks, Pete. Let's give it up for Pete. Thanks a lot, man. You can go sit down. I got it. Now, there's some things on this drawing. I don't know. They said last service they couldn't see it in the overflow. Here, can you see it? Did you see it before? There it is. All right. Okay. So, there's some things in here that aren't quite right. There's some myths that have crept into our nativity scene, kind of some not-so facts about Jesus' birth. And the first one is the stable. Jesus was probably not born in a stable. And I know the way we imagine it is Mary and Joseph are walking down Main Street, Bethlehem, and Joseph is running into the front desk of every hotel, and nobody has any vacancy, and so eventually they get put out in this little A-frame barn, and that's probably not how it happened. The word in Luke translated inn more likely should be translated as guest room. And hotels were more of a Roman thing. They weren't really a Jewish thing. What the Jews did was they would host people in their own homes. And so probably what Joseph and Mary are doing are knocking on all the doors, seeing if anyone has an available guest room. And nobody did, but in a lot of houses back then, the family would live upstairs, and there was a little entryway or a little courtyard on the lower story of the house. And at night, the animals would be brought in to keep the house warm, maybe to protect the house, and there would be feeding troughs in there for the animals. So probably Jesus was not born in a stable. Probably he was born in the courtyard or the entryway of a house. So that's one of the myths that that has crept into Jesus' birth. The next one is the three kings. The three kings. Now the Bible doesn't say they were kings. The Bible calls them magi or wise men. Chances are these guys were scholars. They were astronomers. And they weren't kings. And we don't know how many there were. We say there were 3 because they gave 3 gifts, and the song says there were 3, but the Bible doesn't tell us how many they were. And they probably weren't there when Jesus was born, because the star appeared when Jesus was born, and they came from the east, so their journey might have taken them as long as 1 or 2 years. And Matthew says Jesus was a child by the time they got there. So the 3 kings are not in the Nativity. And then the last myth was that it was December 25th. We don't know the exact day that Jesus was born. It probably wasn't December 25th. The church decided in the 4th century, over 300 years later, that we would celebrate his birth on the 25th. And has anyone ever told you that Christmas was originally a pagan holiday? Have you ever heard that? Well, it's true. It was. There was a pagan festival to celebrate the winter solstice. It was very immoral. It was like a Mardi Gras. And so basically the Christians took it over. They kind of hijacked the holiday and made it about Jesus instead. So even, the date that we celebrate it is a myth. We tell our kids that was Jesus' birthday. It probably wasn't. So there's some mythology even in our nativity sets and even in what we believe about Jesus' birth. But you know what? Those are all insignificant details, right? Like none of that really matters a whole lot. None of that really changes the story that Jesus was born in Bethlehem to Mary and Joseph. This is still historical. We can still trust this story. But some go further. Some deny Jesus' birth altogether, or they at least deny that he was born of a virgin. And some people will say that even though there is some evidence to support that Jesus lived and did the things we say he did, really the evidence is only enough to persuade childish, unthinking adults who already believe in him. So some people would just go the rest of the way and tell us that this entire story is a myth. And what I want to emphasize to you this morning is that the Gospel of Luke is historical. Luke is historical. Not just his story about Jesus' birth, but all of his stories about Jesus' life and his ministry and his death and his resurrection. The entire Gospel of Luke is historical. Luke roots his Gospel in history. He roots it in historical fact. And we know this because he relates the stories in his Gospel to current events. He talks about what's going on, and then he says this is when it happened in comparison to everything else. And he's the only Gospel writer to do this. Matthew, Mark, John, they're all historical too, but they don't make the historical references that Luke does. And the way he did it, back then they didn't have BC and AD yet. Okay, it was a little soon. So the way ancient historians would date stuff is they would say that this happened in this year of this ruler's reign. And that's what Luke does too. And those are the passages we're going to be looking at this morning. And because Luke roots his gospel in history, we must root our faith in history. Because Luke's gospel is based on historical fact, our faith must be based on historical fact. And remember, we're investigating the gospel of Luke so you can be mature. So you can be spiritually mature, like Jesus was. So you can be the kind of Christian he wants you to be. Remember, that's the question we're asking. What kind of Christian does Jesus want me to be? And what we're going to see today, that in order to be mature, in order to be the kind of Christian Jesus wants you to be and the kind that he deserves for you to be, you need to develop factual faith. So I want you to open your Bibles to the Gospel of Luke. And again, we're going to start in Luke chapter 1. And I want to encourage you to actually bring your paper printed Bibles to church with you. I know it's convenient to have it on your phone. I like this better. I think it's better for you to know where to find things in your paper Bible. I like to hear pages turning. So I want to encourage you over the next few months to bring this with you. And go to Luke chapter 1. Luke's the third book in the New Testament. You have Matthew, Mark, Luke. If you get to Luke or if you get to John or Acts, you went too far. We're going to be in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 1. And what Luke does is he dates Jesus' birth. He tells us specifically when Jesus was born. And I guess I should warn you, the passages we're going to look at today are the passages you normally skip over when you read the Gospel. They're the kind of stuff you usually skim through and gloss over, and because there's names and places and things like that we don't know. But they're hugely important for our faith. So Luke chapter 1, verse 5 says, "In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. his wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. And what we'll see is that Zechariah and Elizabeth become the parents of John the Baptist, who was the forerunner to Jesus. And Jesus is only 6 months younger than John. 6 months later, Mary becomes pregnant. So when Luke dates John's birth, he also dates Jesus' birth. And he says, in the time of Herod, king of Judea. So we have Herod, and he was king from 37 to 4 BC. So right away, Luke gives us a time frame. He gives us a window of when these things could have happened. Let's go to chapter 2. Luke chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. And now he's going to tell us when Jesus was actually born. So this is when his birth was announced. Now he's telling us when he was actually born. In chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, he says, "In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And it was because of this census that Joseph and Mary had to travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem to be counted among Joseph's family." So he says, in those days, Caesar Augustus took a census. And Caesar ruled the Roman Empire from 31 BC to AD 14. So again, remember, he's given us a window, and so far it's checking out. It's okay. It's the same time frame. But he also says this was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And from other historical sources, we know that this census under Quirinius took place in AD 6. AD 6. So that's a problem, right? That doesn't fit our window. And when it comes to dating Jesus' birth, this census is kind of the bugaboo. This is the wrench that gets thrown into the mix. Now, Luke is aware that the census takes place in AD 6. In fact, he mentions this census in the book of Acts. So he's aware that the census took place later on. This isn't a problem in Luke's mind. This doesn't surprise him. So how do we resolve this? Well, there's a few ways. The first way is that Quirinius was also a military leader in Syria before he became the governor. And he was a military leader from 8 to 4 BC. 8 to 4 BC. So, and this Greek word translated governor could also be translated leader. So maybe what Luke's saying is this was the census taken the first time Quirinius was a leader in Syria. Maybe talking about his military leadership during this time instead of when he was governor later on, which this would fit our window. Another solution, maybe a simpler one, is that the Greek word translated first could also be translated before. So maybe instead of translating this verse as this was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor, we could translate it, this was the census that took place before Quirinius was governor, before the time he served when the census was taken 10 years later. So either way, this really isn't that much of a problem for Luke. We can resolve it. This does fit this time frame given to us for Jesus to be born. And not only does he date it, he gives us the name of Jesus' parents. Go back to chapter 1. And in chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, Luke says, in the 6th month, talking about the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy with John, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. Now this was common in ancient biographies. Whenever a writer was talking about the life and the exploits of some great hero, they wanted to give you the backstory. They wanted to give you the origin story, right? Let you know where that person came from. And that's what Luke is doing here with Jesus and this birth announcement. So this was very common. And look how specific he is. He gives us the town, Nazareth. He gives us the country, Galilee. He gives us the name of the father, Joseph. He gives us the father's ancestry, back to David. And he gives us the mother's name, Mary. He is very, very specific here. He is very historical. So we have Jesus' parents. We have this time frame, this window for Jesus' birth. And then in chapter 3, Luke dates Jesus' ministry. He tells us the time when Jesus began to preach and to teach and to heal and to do all the things the rest of the book was about. And this helps us date Jesus' birth, because Luke says Jesus began his ministry when he was 30. So if we can determine what year Jesus started his ministry, we can go back 30 years and determine the date he was born. Okay? Make sense? You with me? Okay, all right, good. So we're going to read in Luke chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. And he's dating the start of John's ministry. Shortly after John began his ministry, Jesus came to be baptized and started his ministry. So in Luke chapter 3, he says, "In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod, tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip, tetrarch of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias, tetrarch of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, son of Zechariah, in the desert." So he's dating the start of Jesus' ministry, and the first figure he gives us is Tiberius Caesar. He says in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius. And Tiberius was Caesar from AD 14 to 37. But he began to take authority in some of the provinces in AD 11. So he wasn't technically emperor till later on, but he started to take power in AD 11. And he also says, while Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea. And Pilate was governor from AD 26 to 36. 26 to 36. And then he mentions a couple tetrarchs. He mentions Herod and Philip. And these are both sons of Herod the Great. So when Herod the Great died, his kingdom was divided up 4 ways and parceled out among his sons. One of those sons was also named Herod, who reigned from 4 BC to AD 39. Another son was Philip, who also reigned from 4 BC, because remember that's when their dad died, to AD 33 or 34. Then he mentions Lysanias. We don't really know much about Lysanias. There's really no significant reference to him anywhere else. But then he says, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas. Now Annas was high priest from AD 7 to 15. And the Romans took the priesthood away from him, and they appointed his sons and his sons-in-law to be high priests after him. Caiaphas is his son-in-law, but because of that relationship, Annas continued to have a lot of power, and he really had a lot of control over the high priesthood. So sometimes in the Gospels it says Annas was high priest, sometimes it says Caiaphas, sometimes it says Annas and Caiaphas, like here. And Caiaphas was high priest. Come on. Caiaphas was high priest from AD 18 to 36. AD 18 to 36. So you put all this together, and we get a possible time frame for when Jesus began his ministry. When you look at all these dates in this window, and you see where they all line up, we get a possible time frame of AD 26 to 33 or 34 for when Jesus began his ministry. And I just got to say, that is a very narrow window. That is only a 7 or 8 year period. Luke is basically pinpointing the time when Jesus began his ministry. And the most probable date, from what we know of the Gospels, from what we know of the early church, from what we know from church history, the most probable date that Jesus began his ministry was in AD 26. That's the year he probably began his ministry, which fits this window. The only problem is it's in the 15th year of Tiberius. If we date it from when he actually became emperor, it would be AD 29. But if we date it from when he began to assume authority in some of the provinces, we would date it from AD 11, which would still put us at AD 26. So the most probable date Jesus began his ministry is 26. And then if we back up 30 years to determine when he was born, that puts us at 4 BC, which fits our window that Luke gives us here. So, why the history lesson, right? Came to church today for a sermon. It's almost Christmas. Why do I need a history lesson today? Well, you need a history lesson because your faith is historical. You need to know this history because your faith is historical. Remember, Luke said he wrote this so you may know the certainty of what you've been taught about Jesus Christ. So when Luke writes his gospel, this isn't once upon a time. This isn't a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. This is history. This is real stuff. And Luke wants you to know that your faith is historically certain, that it's rooted in fact. And remember, we're doing our investigation of the Gospel of Luke so you can be mature. So you can be spiritually mature, like Jesus was. And a mature Christian bases their faith on history. Not mythology, not what you've always been told to believe. A mature Christian bases their faith on what actually happened. Here's why. Because if we can trust Luke's history, we can trust his theology. I'll say that again. If we can trust Luke's history, we can trust his theology. In other words, if we can trust Luke in matters that can be tested, we can trust him in matters that can't be tested. And if we can trust him to give us the facts, we can also trust him to interpret those facts for us. Because here's the thing. Luke gives us the facts and then he interprets them. And his interpretation is that Jesus was born of a virgin. Really? Really? Luke, you're a doctor. You know how babies are made. You know how babies are born. They don't come from virgins. Even Mary knew that. That's why when Gabriel said to her, she said, how is this going to happen? I'm a virgin. Like, virgins don't have babies. You get it, right? But here's the thing. Luke got all of this right. So why wouldn't I trust him when he explains those facts for me? If he went to all the trouble to get all these names and all these dates and all their titles correct, is he going to drop the ball when he explains those facts for us? I don't think so. But if he got that wrong, if all this time frame didn't work out, I'm not going to trust him when he tells me Jesus was born in a virgin. Like, if you can't even get that right, why would I believe you when you're telling me something miraculous happened? But because we can trust his history, I'm willing to trust his theology. And it's the same thing at the end of the gospel when he says that Jesus rises from the dead. Easter's in a few months, so we'll be talking about the resurrection. And he says Jesus rose from the dead. Again, Luke, you're a doctor. Dead people don't come back to life. They just don't. A dead person is dead. Luke knows that. But his explanation was that Jesus rose from the dead. And because everything else in his gospel checks out, I'm willing to trust him. Because the facts of every other story line up and he gets it all correct, he earns the credibility to say Jesus rose from the dead. But if his stories were wrong, if there's all kinds of historical inaccuracies and he can be proven wrong and the evidence doesn't support what he says, I am never going to believe him when he says that somebody came back from the dead. But if we can trust Luke's history, we can trust his theology. So I just want to ask, why do you believe? Why do you believe in Jesus? Why do you believe he was born of a virgin? Is it because you were brought up to believe that? Because that's what your parents and your pastors always told you? Is it because you like the Christmas cheer and you like the nativity and it makes you feel good and it's nice to think about baby Jesus? Or do you believe in him because the facts support believing in him? See, if you're going to become a mature Christian, if you're going to be the kind of Christian Jesus wants you to be and that Jesus deserves for you to be, you're going to develop factual faith. You're going to root your faith in the facts of history. And this does a few things for you. It bolsters your witness, right? It makes you more confident and more compelling when you're talking to unbelievers. If you can just tell people not only what you believe about Jesus, but the reasons and the evidence why you believe it, they might take you a little more seriously. Or at least you'll be more confident in those conversations. And it also brings you to maturity. Because when you're made certain of what you believe, you have more confidence in prayer. You're more willing to obey Jesus. You're more eager to follow him and to follow after his example. It does all kinds of things for you. And the way we develop this factual faith, I think, is just to avail ourselves of the resources that we have today. I don't know if you guys have heard of apologetics, but this is a whole field of study devoted to the evidence and the arguments for the Christian faith. And I just wanted to share a book with you this morning. It was the first apologetics book I ever read. I still think it was probably the best. I'm sure you've heard of it by now, but The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. You've heard of that? This is a great book. In this book, it's actually kind of like the Gospel of Luke. Lee Strobel, he was a journalist. He was a legal editor. And what he did, he was an atheist, but his wife became a Christian. And so he decided to do his own investigation about the life and ministry of Jesus Christ. And he traveled around the country, he interviewed Christian scholars, he interviewed Christian experts, asking them, what is the evidence for you to believe this? And at the end of the investigation, he himself actually becomes a Christian. He believes in Jesus. He's written some follow-up books in this series. They're all great. And it really does read like a modern-day Luke. It's pretty fun to read. But resources like this, there are all kinds of resources you can take advantage of to develop a factual faith. There's books you can read on your own. There's small group studies. I mean, there are all kinds of things you can do to root your faith in the facts of history. And it's so important that we do this. And this is what brings us to spiritual maturity, because factual faith, a faith rooted in the facts, works itself out in the facts of your daily life. In other words, because Jesus was a real historical person back then, he can make real historic changes in your life today. Mythology can't do that. Okay? Believing in Santa never made a kid nicer, right? Kids are still naughty, they're still rotten. The only way they get presents is because you still love them and don't want them to have a bad Christmas, right? Believing in Santa never made anyone nicer, actually. Because mythology can't change your life, but history can. And because Jesus was a real historical person, and because the same Spirit that was with Jesus during his life is with us during our life, he can make real historic changes in your life today and change you to be like Jesus. So wherever you are in your faith, whatever your level of spiritual maturity is, Jesus wants you to develop factual faith.